Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special episode of Super Switch Headz, the premier Nintendo podcast on all of the internet. My name is David Howe, and we are joined by two very special guests this week on the show. Please, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves. To my left over here, we have the wonderful, actually, you can't tell, but it's B-Bon.
Okay.
Yes, we got Brian Bonnet on the show.
Hello, my name is Brian Bonnet. I live here in Austin, Texas. I do a lot of comedy. I know David for a long time, and I love this game we're about to talk about. I cannot wait to start talking.
Hell yeah. And then down below me on this Discord call, we have the wonderful...
Hey, my name's Dylan, also known as Rapatika. It's been a long time since I've been on the show, so thank you for having me back. And I would not pick any other episode. This is the one to do, so I'm very excited about it.
Very good. I'm happy about that. I think my cat just knocked over a bunch of stuff in the background, but this is an experimental show. We're having a good time. That's right. We are going to be talking today all about the wonderful game UFO 50. This is a game that came out very recently by Muss, the creators of Spelunky and Spelunky 2, and maybe a couple other games. I'm not exactly sure. But basically, if you're not familiar, it is a collection of 50 games that have all been packaged together in a kind of unit that is meant to evoke something along the lines of like Atari 50, right? Where it's kind of a celebration of an old gaming company called UFO Soft that never actually existed, but it's as if someone went in and repackaged all these games and put them together in an emulated form so that we could play them now. The kind of whole caveat of this is that none of these games actually existed in the 80s. They all were created in the past like 8 years or so, right? And so this game has completely taken over my life. I don't know if that's true for you guys. I've like finally been able to put it down a little bit and play a little bit of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. And I should also probably say this episode, I'm not exactly sure when this is going to be coming out. So there's no news on this episode here today. So if we make cultural references about what's happening and it's out of date, that's what's going on.
I'm holding a newspaper.
Yeah. But I've probably put about like 50 or 60 hours into this game already. I know that you guys aren't quite as far, but I imagine you guys have also played quite a bit of this game as well, correct?
Yes, I have, as of looking at my Steam library, I have put 49.2 hours into it.
Jesus.
Wow, I'm the noob of the bunch. I have like 35 hours. There's still some games that have cobwebs on them, so I still have some yet to explore, but I got a few cherries, a few golds in the mix, so I've definitely, feel like I've spent a lot of time with
That's true for me as well. And if you're watching the video version of the show here, I've got up as well a list of all 50 of the games. This, whenever you open the game, you kind of get all these different cartridges that you can pick from, and you can kind of pick whichever one you want to play. And as you might be able to see if you're watching as well right now on the video version, the games are kind of ordered chronologically. So UFO Soft as a company was a company that existed, quote unquote, back in the 1980s. They started as like a hardware and software PC personal computer company, and then eventually kind of started making games. There's kind of an overall sort of lore to this game that you sort of uncover as you play. And they kind of went from 1982, I believe, to 1989. And so all of the games on this list are kind of laid out chronologically in that way. We're going to basically be talking about the game in general, and then also about not every single one of the games probably, but some of our favorites, go into a little bit deeper dive as we're talking here. And, just kind of, basically, I just wanted to talk about this game, and I figured we might as well record it for content. So that's what we're doing today. I guess overall thoughts. Let's start with you, Brian. Like, what are some of your thoughts about the game overall? What do you think about kind of like the meta structure of it? And is there anything that you think people should know about this game before we start talking about it?
The thing that it's just like continues to blow my mind while playing this. The more time I put into it, the more like I get sucked up into the world of UFO 50.
Yeah.
Like the way that it's all interconnected in even small ways. Like you're playing a game and then you see an art asset reused, or like you're playing a game and you see they've twisted their own mechanics, like they really like have this cool way of like making it feel like a cohesive thing. Like all of these games do stand on their own, but the way that this package fits together somehow, like the parts are greater than, or the sum is greater than the parts, even though the parts are already stellar. Like I cannot oversell the parts themselves, but together as a package, somehow I don't know why the alchemy of it works out that way, but it really does. Like the fact that you can just jump from one game to the other and you can kind of see all these weird connections and they have this lore and they all sort of build in each other in interesting and cool ways. Like it's, I don't know. I just love it as a package. I don't think that any one of these games would shine as strong as they do on their own. And as a collection, it really just becomes truly one of the coolest things I've ever interacted with.
Yeah, I completely agree. And yeah, you're right. I think a lot of the games in this collection could be sold on their own as full games, and we should also probably reiterate, these are not mini games; they are full games in and of themselves. Some of them are quite short. There's no beating around the bush there, but some of them can be up to like 10, 20 hours long. And there's a JRPG in this collection, right? Which is insane. But, some of them are like score chasing, arcade style games, but they are all kind of in that 8-bit style, as if the LX3, I think, was the system that these games supposedly were released for, is kind of meant to have been released alongside the NES, right? Back in the 80s. It was kind of that era of gaming. What about you, Repetika? What are some of the thoughts that you have about this game overall before we start jumping into some specifics?
Yeah, I mean, I've been looking forward to this game for years and years. Like, I think it was announced in 2018, and I've probably been following it since then because Spelunky Spelunky 2 wasn't released back in 2018, but those are two of my favorite games of all time. If you're watching the video version, I got Spelunky merch all over the place. Love that game so much. So anything released by Derek Yu is going to be exciting for me. And so even if like one of the 50 games in this was like a Derek Yu game, I probably would have been excited for this. But because it is him and other people, and there's 50 games, and like you can watch a trailer and it's like hard to tell exactly what you're going to get when you boot it up for the first time. I think I went in with like not really expectations of any kind, just because it's no game has ever been quite like this before. Like, as you mentioned, David, there's been collections of other games, but that's very different than a collection of 50 new games, brand new games. The only thing you could, I guess, compare it to is like a WarioWare, I suppose, but even that is very different because that's micro games or mini games like a Mario Party, something like that. So yeah, but since then I just love immediately booting it up and having all 50 games right there. You don't have to play through them to unlock anything. You can go wherever you want with it. And I think that's such a great part about it. So I just kind of, when I first booted up, just read through a bunch of them and just clicked around, read a couple descriptions. And then I saw my boy Pilot, because of course there's a character in here, Pilot, who was introduced in Spelunky, and then he's brought in here as like the kind of the mascot for the whole thing, which is interesting. So so Pilot kicked off the whole love for it.
I don't think I knew that Pilot was introduced in Spelunky originally. Maybe I didn't get that far.
He's in Spelunky too. He's a pretty hard character to unlock. He's in a weird spot, but even his journal entry in Spelunky is like, I miss my beloved ship, the Campanella. So like that's been referenced for years and years. So it was so cool to me that he was in this game, but also that he's in like 10 of the games. Like I've seen his head or his picture or as a playable character all over the place. So yeah, this game's
they
amazing.
were finishing Spelunky 2 while this game was like they were co-developing Spelunky 2 and UFO 50 at the same time.
Totally right. Yeah, and it's also like in the lore of this world, which I often like to pretend like I'm in that world
totally.
Because it makes the gameplay experience that much more fun. But you like 100%. To think that Derek, played or had an LX3 back in the day and played Pilot Quest or any of the Campanella games and sort of, just took the character and had it as a little homage to this long since dead, company back in the day or whatever. Right. So I love that idea. And I actually didn't realize that Pilot was introduced in that game all the way back then. And you're right. I mean, this game has been in development for so goddamn long. You've got a lot of developers here. You've got, I think, the developer of, what are some of the other games that some of the developers worked on? We got Downwell.
That was the one that I was going to call out.
There's this one fella, I think it's Jeff something.
Catacomb Kids is one of the games that the other guy made.
That's correct.
One of the guys is like a board game designer, I'm pretty sure. And then Eric Cirque, who is the composer of Spelunky 1 and 2, he's in here. I think he does all the music for all the games. I might be wrong about that. But then he also developed some of the games. Like I believe Barbuda is a game that he created. So that I feel like this may be the first time he's released a game other than like smaller things on itch.
Right.
Also
that's pretty
did
cool.
Mooncat and Warp Tank.
Yeah. So
Wow, what a great trifecta to have under your belt.
Yeah.
Those are all great games.
you know, to be honest, like there are like basically the developers, quote unquote, of these games for UFO Soft, I do think transfer over to the real guys, right? Like, so Thorsten Petter, I believe, is often listed as the composer for the games. It's like sound by
Okay.
Thorsten Petter. And then Thorsten Petter is the developer of Barbuda, right? Or is like the creator of Barbuda. So,
Gotcha.
and if you're wondering, Barbuda is like the first game in the collection. It is the oldest game in this, but and it's also like very much feels like the first game that any of these people ever made. Like it is pretty hard to
Yeah,
play,
rough.
you know, but it's like, but it's cool, you know, and I might be wrong on that, but I feel like Thorsten Petter is Eric Cirque, right? And then
I think you're
Yeah,
correct.
because they all have kind of code names, right?
right.
And I don't know. I don't know if there's a continuity between that, but it's pretty fun to because all these games have credits too when you beat them, right? And then it's just made up names for all the credits. I don't think you
Right.
can actually see the names of the developers other than like the opening cinematic that plays when you boot up the game. Like
That's
there isn't like
correct.
a credits for the actual game.
Yeah. There's kind of this, kind of the lore of the game as you start it. It starts with credits, and it's got this kind of like jungle, like drum and bass track that plays under it, like
So
you would
good.
like
So
an
good.
amazing song, yeah. But it's like it's something that you would hear from like Juarez files or something, like or like where's you know like whenever you would like
Or, like-
download a crack or something back in the day,
Sure.
you know,
like
and-
Street Fighter 3 Third Strike.
yeah, exactly. It's like basically they, you know, and it shows like pixelated images of the development staff like opening up a garage and finding an old LX3 system and dumping all the ROMs and then putting the collection together. Right?
Yeah, what are they called? Like the UFO recovery team or
Yeah,
something like that?
I think so,
which is
right.
So cool.
Yeah. So there, even within the game for the actual credits of the game, there's kind of lore to it as well. Right. But yeah, maybe we should start breaking down some of these games a little bit, like some of our favorites. Does anybody have one that they want to shout out first?
I mean, I'll happily jump into Pilot Quest. As I mentioned, this was a big one for me because of my boy from Spelunky. But this is also the first one that I booted up because of that, because I saw his goofy little face on the cartridge there. I'm like, I gotta see what's going on here, which ended up being like the best one to play first because of the way that it has a what would it be called? Like it's like a clicker game, but then it's also like an idle game at the same time.
Totally.
So to have just like accumulating resources being like the first game you boot up and then have that go through, just a really weird, interesting game, and like immediately threw me off of like, whoa, some of these games are going to be really strange in their structure, and then it also has just kind of like a Zelda like dungeon gameplay loop to it as well. So I love Pilot Quest. I still have not beat it. I'm trying to get all this silk, and my God, it is hard to get.
Yeah.
Heaps of silk.
That's right. Yeah, it is. I think that's a great way to say it. It's kind of like an idle game mixed with a top-down Zelda game, right? And basically the way that it works is basically you are Pilot, who will kind of get to this character in a second, how important Campanella is to this overall project. But you are Pilot, you've crashed on this planet, and you basically have this, you have a yo-yo, and then you have to like basically just hit this crystal over and over again in order to buy more resources. And then eventually you can buy meat. And once you can buy meat, then you can go on these kind of quests, right? And then there's kind of this overworld that you can go through. But the whole time that you're out there, based on how much meat you accumulated before you go out, there's like a timer, right? And the timer, and this game was the original
Just
one.
the silliest game, like everything you're describing.
Yeah,
right now
it's
is so goofy.
ridiculous.
I
But
love it.
it released in 1988, right? And this was the first game that you utilized the LX3's internal clock, right? So it very much utilizes that clock for almost everything. So it's basic. A lot of people say this is the game that you want to start, or at least you play in relatively chronological order, except for Pilot Quest, because Pilot Quest kind of will work for you in the background, right? You'll go out and you'll get different resources, and they'll continue to accrue while you're playing other games. But then I'm getting ahead of myself. When you're out there in the world, there's kind of a countdown that'll go further and further down, and instead of taking damage when you get hit, you lose points off the clock. So you have to go out and get a bunch of resources and then make your way back before the timer runs out. And man, that's a super fun game. And I think that's also sort of game mechanic that I do see in other games as well, right? That kind of
Mhm.
like go out, get as far as you can, and return to home base. You know, that's something
like
you see. Porgy's like
Porgy is
that.
very similar.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
There's a couple other ones as well, but that's something that's really wonderful about this collection is just that like you see one game does something similar and then all of a sudden they repeat those things in subsequent games. You know, characters will return, game design mechanics and stuff like that. It's just really fascinating.
I think that like this is a really good example of how focused the game design is in all of these games,
Mhm.
because everything you just said sounds crazy. Like there are so many things happening, but the defining characteristic through this entire thing in this one game is time. Everything's about time.
Mhm.
You accumulate resources through time, and then when also you're exploring, it's all time based, because if your time runs out, you lose everything you've collected, including through some of the other runs. There's a whole resource that you carry over between every
Mhm.
run, and you can lose all of that progress if you don't make it back out in time. And then
Right.
every time you get hit, you lose time. It's not health, it's all time based.
Mhm.
And so they built an entire game where the only thing that matters is time,
Yeah.
and that's really cool.
Mhm.
And so like it doesn't get focused, like bogged down in all these other, there's a lot of other systems that are in there, but they're all time based. And
Yeah.
so that's like the cohesive nature of it all. And so that's what's like so awesome about all of these games is they find a very specific thing to like build off of. They can get complicated, they can have a lot of things happening to them, but they're all so laser focused.
Yeah.
And like this game is a really, really clear example of just like how laser focused something can be, very spread out, but simultaneously just like there's no fat on any of these games.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
agree. I think we're going to take this time and kind of talk a little bit about Campanella and the Campanella franchise as a whole. You know, basically, if there was any game in this collection or game series in this collection that is like the Mario equivalent, it's Campanella, right? I think Campanella is a game where you play as a little UFO. To me, it really plays like a Super Monkey Ball style game.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? You're kind of like trying to get to the end of each stage and you're trying not to lose all your lives, right? But it's also sort of Lunar Lander or any of those games that you kind of press, you know, you press the thrust button to go up and you're
Mhm.
trying to move as best you can, right?
A little like the jetpack in Spelunky as well, which is
Yeah.
I feel like a fun connection for me, given the character being pulled from that game.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But, you know, in the lore, you know, Campanella is the reason that the company rebranded themselves from LX Systems to UFO Soft. And you can kind of see that this is sort of their recurring franchise. I think this is the one game that has 3 mainline entries. There's a Campanella 1, 2, and 3 in this collection. And not only that, there are spin-off games. So, you know, Pilot Quest is a spin-off. I think technically, what is it? Zordath or Return to Zordath?
So that the Pilot Quest is the return to Zordath, but Zordath is the first time the pilot shows up.
Planet Zoldath. Excuse
Planet
me.
Zordath is the first
Yeah,
time
yeah.
that
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the intro of the character, right?
Right. So you could kind of like argue that Planet Zoldath is like in the Campanella like timeline or whatever, you know, because there are games that sort of have sequels and whatnot. But there's that, there's Campanella 2, Campanella 3, but then there's also the Great Bell Race as well.
Yeah.
Or the Big Bell Race, excuse me. And that game basically takes Campanella and turns it into a kart racer, kind of. So if like Campanella is Super Mario Brothers, Big Bell Race is Super Mario Kart, right?
I love
And
that comparison.
yeah, totally. And it's not a great game necessarily. The Big Bell Race, it's one of the easiest games to beat. I think it's one of the few cherries that I have right now is the Big Bell Race. If you're not familiar, cherries are kind of like a second win condition you can get past just beating the game and rolling credits, right? But it is a very fun game, and it's cool that this series that has grown and gets bigger within this collection of UFO 50 enough to have like spin-offs and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Like I really enjoy that quite a bit.
Yeah, I think like Big Bell Race feels like the training grounds when you go back to Campanella, because Campanella requires you to be so much more precise and it gets much harder and there's boss fights and all that, whereas the other one's more just like a simple arcade thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I love too the description of those two games. So yeah, Campanella, it says something like this inspired the branding change to UFO Soft. But it also says that became like a pack-in game
right
for the LX. And then the Big Bell Race Also, they made that like in 2 weeks. It says in the description. It was made in 2 weeks and also became a packing game. So I feel like the idea was like, okay, we have Campanella as the pack-in, but we also want like a multiplayer thing to be the pack-in. So like, what can we make really quickly using like copy paste the code and then change the levels around?
Totally.
So I kind of love the connection. Like if there's going to be two games that feel like, okay, one's kind of like a mode for the other one, I feel like the way they describe it in the game at least makes it like a passable. I mean, there's 50 games in here, so I'm not going to complain if two of them are pretty similar, but
totally.
I like the connection between those two.
It also explains why the game is so short. There's not like a ton, there's not like it's like one Grand Prix of 8 races and that's it, right? But it's like they never really intended for that game to be sold on its own, right? Like that was always just meant to be a pack.
It's like Wii Sports, yeah.
Yeah, it's like Wii Sports or like almost like another mode of Campanella, right?
Yeah.
I do think we should move over to talking about Campanella 2, which for my money, I think is definitely one of the best games in this package. And I say that especially as a Spelunky fan, right? This game came out in 1985, I believe. Maybe it was 1986 within the canon, obviously. I feel like I need to keep clarifying that. But this game took the idea of the original Campanella and turned it into this like massive roguelike in the style of Spelunky 2, right? And I know you're a huge Spelunky fan, Dylan. What are your thoughts on this game? Do you I know you haven't played as much as me. We were talking about it earlier today, but do you have thoughts about this game overall?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, one thing that I've seen a lot of discussion on is that like, man, these games are pretty hard for the most part. And I think a big part of that is like, I can't think of a single one of the games in here that has a tutorial, right? Like all of them throw you right into it, and you can pause and look at the controls. But even I was just playing, what is it called? Cyber Owl.
Yeah, Cyber Owl.
I was just playing that, and when you pause and look at the controls in that one, it's just like it says different controls per game and doesn't list anything. So some of them are pretty obtuse in terms of like how you actually play it. And I feel like that was one that I was like, I've played for a half an hour, and I was like, man, I do not really understand the structure here. I'm like just getting the basics down. But I feel like now that I've played a lot more Campanella and the Bell Race, and I have like the movement down because it has a very similar control to the UFO part of it. I feel like I need to go back to it. So I definitely need to spend more time with it. You would think I would, considering my Spelunky connection, but I that's just what's so great about this collection. I just feel like I have so much more to dive into.
Yeah, you're saving it for later
in that way.
Yeah,
exactly.
What about you, Brian? Have you played Campanella 2?
So I am doing the unhinged thing and slowly chipping my way through each game. Like I have skipped ahead and played Pilot Quest, but I have only made it to, as of the recording right now, Hotfoot.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
I'm only to 26.
Gotcha.
So I have spent 50 hours and I've only played 27 games.
Wow, that's crazy. Well, we'll try not to go too hard on some of the ones and spoil anything for you.
You guys can play some of the. You can talk as much as you want about the later ones. But
all right,
I unfortunately cannot chip in on them. So
no worries at all. Well, then
I agree.
Oh yeah, very good. That's all I need from you. I mean, I'll follow up on that. I mean, it's you play, first of all, you play as I forget what the name of Pilot's sister is. But anyway, you play as kind of you play as the Luigi, essentially, in the Mario and Luigi between Pilot and his sister. And you're trying to rescue Pilot, who's been captured in this giant space station. And, you're in the spaceship and you're flying around and you're trying to collect 10 stars in order to get to the exit in each kind of big open section that you're playing in. But then along the way, there are these little doors that you can enter. And whenever you enter a door, you either go into a shop where you can buy upgrades for either your ship or your on foot laser. And that's kind of the other twist, is you can get out of the ship, right? So when you're in the big overworld, you're this tiny little guy, right? And you can like get out and shoot things if you want. But really the big fun part of it is, you get out of your ship, you go inside these doors, then all of a sudden you have these side scrolling, almost like Metroid sections, right? And it becomes this sort of like,
I feel like I haven't made it to any of those yet. That's cool.
Okay. Well, they're right there in level 1. It's like, once you get that kind of rhythm down, you really start to like understand the flow of the game. And another game that this game is really similar to is Blaster Master, because that's a game where, you are in a vehicle and you're going around, and then there are suddenly like top down like Legend of Zelda style segments, right? And this
Right,
kind of does
yeah.
the opposite, where it does the big roguelike section, then all of a sudden you have these platforming Metroid sections, right? And so getting that rhythm down is so fucking addicting. But like you said, it is incredibly hard. I think I'm like 7 or 8 hours into this and I have not beaten this game. And that's not like, it's not a long game. It's like the speed run for this game is probably like 3 or 4 minutes long. I'm just terrible.
Yeah.
You know, it's like Spelunky is very much the same way, right?
Mhm.
Which I really do love. But yeah.
I wanted to ask Brian, like, so you're going through this in chronological order, which I love. What do you decide is done? Are you getting gold? Are you getting cherry before you move on? Or is it just like, I've had enough of Ninpeck, I need to jump onto the next one now?
That's kind of what I'm doing. I'm trying to give at least an hour to a game before I move on. There's a couple that I've gone faster.
That's very generous for some of these games.
For some of these games, I've skipped faster than that. So I'm saying generally, because I'm also a lot of times like I'm getting home from work. It's like 10 p.m. and like, but I can't not play this game because it's the only thing I'm thinking about whenever like I have free time. So I'll log on and I'll try to start playing, but I don't have a lot of time. And so I will then boot up one of these brand new games. And like you said, these games are tough. And like learning a new game takes a while, you know, like there is a whole learning curve to I feel like the trajectory for these games is boot it up, get your ass kicked, not know what the fuck's going on, finally kind of start to get it. And then there's like an aha moment. And now you're finally starting to play the game. And that's like maybe an hour into it, couple hours sometimes, depending on some of these.
Right.
And then like you're like, okay, now I'm actually making progress, you know? And so like, there's a couple that I booted up, like some of these, what is it? Specifically, there's like the big board game one.
Avianas?
Yes, Avianas. I booted that up. I played like 2 turns and I was like, not today. I can't. No, I think I did too much going on here. I love what you're going for, but it's just I cannot think this hard right now.
Like, what do they call those kinds? I think it's like a 4X game or something. Or there's a genre of game that's sort of, I don't know,
one that typically needs a pretty extensive like tutorial to it for you to be in.
Yeah, because like the way that game works is like you're like every turn praying to a god to get bonuses to then like do things, and you have to like chain them together. So you need to now know like what the other gods do, and I'm just no, I'll come back to this one. I think I spent about 15 minutes on that one. I'm like, I'm gonna shelve that one for the time being.
That one definitely feels like it was created by the board game designer of the group, right? Like a lot of these games actually really feel like board games. That's definitely one, and I think it bears repeating here that, you know, none of these games like have manuals. You know, it's like you imagine that. Back when these games came out, obviously they had like box art and they came with manuals that you would read like in the car ride home after you bought the disc, like at KB Toys or something, right? Like back in the 80s, you know. But I think what UFO 50 does so well is give you the feeling of like going over to a friend's house who threw away all the boxes and like threw away all the manuals and just had a bunch of cartridges, and you're like, ooh, what's this game? And you like throw it on from like a box, and you know, a big box that's holding everything, and then you just kind of have to fucking figure it out. Or kind of like nowadays, like when we would download ROMs online, and it's like, you know, these games were meant to have you read the manuals beforehand, but you know, fuck, I got this from some website, some pirated site or whatever, right? And then I pop it in and I just have to fucking figure it out. So the game, I think honestly, it would have been really nice if they did include manuals in this or box art, right, for the games, just because that would really tickle the kind of Asperger's part of my brain that really wants all of this to really fit together, right? But I think that, but it's, you know, they went the other way with it, which I think is fine, and something that I think that we will see soon, because a lot of people are becoming obsessive about this game like we are, is people making box art, making manuals, making guides and stuff like that, and kind of having that be a community effort. And I think that's something that we've seen a lot with like Spelunky and games like Binding of Isaac, that are these kind of community-led experiences, sort of like this is. So I really like to see that going forward.
Yeah, I mean, of the like 40-ish games I've played, I think that one you mentioned, Avianas, is like the only one that I was hyper confused and made no sense to me.
It's
the rest of them
hard.
within, you know, 2 to 3, 4 minutes, you at least like pick up the gameplay loop, and then it's like, okay, I'm gonna get crushed for half an hour before I am able to like make it past, you know, 20 meters in Velgress or something. But I think for the most part, like, they speak for themselves, because for the most part, it's like they're pretty simple games, but they're just designed so elegantly, so they have that level of depth. But like, you can just kind of pick up and play for the most part. Like a lot of the earlier ones do feel very like arcadey in that way, and so it's not meant to have that like long period early on where you're getting introduced to the game, which I appreciate. I'm someone who does not want an hour of cutscenes at the start of a game. I want to get in. I want
Totally.
to play immediately in this game. I think for obviously if you're jumping around from game to game, that's the thing to do, and they do that for the most part across.
Well, I would say right at the midpoint, you hit row 2 and you get into row 3. There's a string of games that start getting a little longer, especially with like the adventure side of it, because there's
Right.
like Golfaria, there's Porgy, Warp Tank, and some of these other ones that have like a lot of meat on the bones that like and that are pretty brutal at the start. That like it takes a while to really get any momentum.
I haven't cracked Golfaria yet. I've tried a few times and I keep putting it down. I know eventually it'll click for me. It hasn't yet, but I do want to quickly before we move on too much. I do want to mention Campanella 3, which is the third game in the pack. I haven't put a lot of time into this game, admittedly, but this does do sort of a different, sort of over the shoulder, almost Star Fox style shooting, where you're kind of like it's like a 3D game. It's like a faux 3D game that was released on this 8-bit console, right? So that was kind of them going a little bit further with it by this point as well in the lore. I think that the company is starting to fall apart. This is toward one of the final releases of this company, and you actually read a little bit about how different people were kind of taking over on some of these games and people are being pushed out of the company and whatever. And there's even a bit of a meta narrative that you can uncover through secrets in the game that I'm not really going to get too far into because I don't want to spoil anything, but it gets pretty weird and dark and the game is maybe haunted. So there's definitely more to go through. And if you're a fan of Spelunky or either of the Spelunky games, you'll definitely know how much Derek, you and Mossmouth love their secrets in their games. But yeah, I did want to bring up Campanella 3 as the kind of final game in the series. And then maybe we could talk about some of these other ones. You brought up Ninpek earlier. And I definitely do want to talk about Ninpek because I think Ninpek is pretty fucking incredible. This game very much feels like I want to say it feels a little bit like Ghosts and Goblins, but there's another game in this collection that really feels like Ghosts and Goblins. Do you have one, Brian, that you think
the way that I would say it's like the Venn diagram of like Gradius and like Contra.
Yeah, okay, it is pretty
kind
Contra-y. Yeah.
Because like it has the auto scroll, which Contra doesn't have.
Right.
But like you're still on the ground, so you do the platforming parts of it, but it has the auto scroll kind of like shmup sort of thing going on with it, like with all the guys coming in and having to dodge through it all, but also with like all of the different environments of like Contra as well. So it's like a weird like Venn diagram of that style of two different styles of a similar game.
Yeah.
Which I think is like what this game a lot of these games do a cool thing of like finding different things and finding a commonality between very different games or like adjacent games and then finding like a way to bridge them together.
Totally.
And Ninpek's a really cool version of that.
Something I do like about this collection is that a lot of these games like have very clear inspirations. You know what I mean? Like from games that actually really existed, but almost all of them do something unique that I've never seen in a game ever before. You know what I mean? And that might just be in the kind of blending of those systems that makes it feel very unique. But all these games feel so modern while totally could have been out in the 80s. You know what I mean? Like they all feasibly could have been done in that way. But Ninpek was one that I played through. I think that was the first game I played in this collection because I think it's like game number 3 or something. But it's like where I was like, oh, holy shit. Like this shouldn't be anywhere near as fun as it is, but I cannot put this down. Right. And you die and it feels really hard, but you're like, oh, but I know exactly what I did wrong and I can like fix that on my next run. Right. And then it's like, and I've gotten to the final boss on Ninpek so many times and died. And it's like, and it makes me like rage, but then it makes me also really motivated to go in and beat it again. And, to get the cherry in this game, it's like you beat it, you roll credits, and then the game just loops back to the beginning and gives you like a whole second quest, kind of like Super Mario Brothers, right? That's just a lot harder the second go round. And in order to get the cherry for this, you have to beat it 2 times in order, right? So yeah, it's just a really fantastic game, and it's really fun to play co-op as well. That's something we haven't really talked about, but about half of the games here feature multiplayer of some kind, be that competitive multiplayer or co-op. Ninpek is one that does support 2-player co-op. It's a lot of fun to play co-op.
David and I booted up one time and got to play through that some, and it was a blast.
Ooh,
I had an awesome time.
Yeah, I'll definitely hit you up. We'll do some co-op as well, because I just finally played co-op for the first time today with David as well, which was fun. That is, my one kind of complaint with this game is that it doesn't have multiplayer built in. You have to use Steam remote play, which
Right. Or play on
I don't know if
TV.
the bug we encountered, David, was the Steam remote play thing or if it was a thing with the game, but it just at one point just my input stopped working, then David stopped working. We just had to lose our session.
Yeah.
So that's too bad. But it's one of those things too. Like when this game kind of finally comes to like Switch, which I'm sure is high on the priority list for them, like it'll have that the couch co-op element, but like it won't have any online, presumably, unless they code that at this point, which I can't see them doing it after the fact.
There's no
so
way.
Not
0% chance.
Not to date this episode, but maybe that online play test might be Nintendo Remote Play that's coming out pretty soon for Nintendo Switch Online. Anyway,
okay.
We'll find out by the time the next episode we record. So I'm not going to go any further.
Tune into Switch Headz to hear the news on that one.
But a game to talk about, you brought it up here. Maybe I can move us on to that. A game that I really love is Party House. And that's what we were playing earlier that unfortunately glitched out on us when we were playing. But Party House is the deck builder of this game, right? So if you're a fan of games like Slay the Spire or obviously Balatro, you're going to love Party House. It's a very similar sort of game, but it's instead of a deck of cards, you're kind of playing with your Rolodex. You're trying to throw this awesome 80s house party with and get as many like VIP really cool guests as you can. But in order to get them, you need to invite people that give you certain amounts of clout or popularity. And then you also have to make enough money to where you can expand your house. And so those are kind of, the green numbers are money that you can earn to expand your house. And the yellow numbers are popularity, which you can then use to buy more guests. And it's got this kind of amazing blackjack mechanic where you want to go higher, but you don't want to have too many people that are like these weird alcoholics like show up at your house because
the wild buddies. I love that they're called the wild buddies.
Yeah. And they have trouble stats on them, right? And if you have too many people with three or more, if you have three or more trouble, basically, then the cops get called on your party and it gets shut
unless
down.
you get a bunch of hippies at your party, and then that cancels out the wild buddy, of course.
Cute dogs and hippies cancel out the trouble, which is great. But yeah, it's got this wonderful deck building mechanic, and I've golded this game. I love it so much, and I want to do the cherry for it, but it's 5 random seeds, so it's like once you beat it, you can play random draws, which is super fun. But this is a great game.
Yeah, I booted it up the first time, and it was kind of late, and I was like, I think I get what's happening here, but my brain is tired. I'm gonna set it down. And then I came back the next day, and I started playing, and I was like, it was like 10 p.m. And I was like, I shouldn't do this, but I want to play this game. I'm gonna play it. And then I looked at the clock and it was like 1:30. And I was like, fuck. That game sunk its teeth into me hard.
Yeah.
Like I almost golded it in like one sitting.
Yeah.
Like I was just like,
impressive.
I can't stop moving. Like this game has taken over my brain.
Yeah, it's so good. I love that one too. I have not golded it yet. You guys are further than me, but I just love, I mean, the scenarios that they set up, of course, those are really well designed. And I haven't even tried any of the random ones yet, but that sounds like a fun challenge. Like in the second scenario, I had like the craziest build with a bunch of introverts where I would just have a party, a huge mansion with 3 introverts, and that would be the party, and it would just crush. And it's like that.
Really?
That is the funnest theming to it. I just love the kind of goofiness of this game that adds so much to it. Like games like this are usually like fantasy themed or that kind of thing. So to have just like a really goofy theme like this is perfect. But question for you guys, do you guys think this game started as like a pun? Because it's a Rolodex builder. Builder, you know? I wonder, that's a conspiracy thing. Like I wonder if that's where the idea came from. It's just that funny thought. But it's such a brilliant game. I feel like that's been like the community favorite from when I've cruised the Discord or the subreddit for the game. I feel like everyone's loving Party House. That's the break.
I mean, it's certainly one that they could have just straight up released for $10 and people would have bought it. I would have loved it. I think it would be a huge hit, honestly. It might even have been a bigger hit if they just released it and marketed that game than UFO 50 is by itself, which is insane to think of.
Yeah.
Like, I kind of don't
Given
think
the price,
I kind of don't think enough people are playing this game in general.
Me neither.
This game, oh, by the way, is $25. I don't know if we said that yet, but it's. I got it. I think
it's a fucking steal.
Yeah,
Like
it's
it is
nuts.
the best value in games, period.
Yeah.
I have friends that are like, oh, I'm going to wait for it to go on sale. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
It's already on sale.
Yeah.
It's already so cheap.
Yeah, brother, that
Jesus
is
Christ.
50 cents a game.
Yes.
Like think about it that way. Anyway, I could easily see myself putting 200 hours into this game for sure.
Yeah,
I'm on track.
I'll get there someday.
Yeah.
And yeah, one last thing on Party House, because it was funny when me and David booted up some co-op today. Like, whoa, this game has co-op. What's going on here with this? And it's cool because instead of you're both just going like, okay, within 30 days I gotta beat it. You're going who can get the objective quicker. Then I think the part that was super smart on top of it is, you know how every level, Brian, has like a limit of like you can only buy like 6 dancers or like 6 bodyguards. Like that limit is shared between the two of you. So if David's buying a bunch of dancers up, then I can't get them anymore. And so there's kind of this push and pull to it in terms of building separate decks, but maybe trying to steal from each other's strategy.
That's right.
That I think is just such a little twist on it that adds so much fun strategy to it. I just was shocked by
it's
that.
like you and I are friends, but we're throwing competing parties on the same night, and and we have to like grab from our circle of friends like who we get to invite or whatever. It's great stuff, dude. Incredible game. So I'm really loving it.
There's a board game called Dominion that I think it's like this is heavily pulling from.
Very Dominion coded, yes.
Yeah, so it makes sense that the multiplayer is set up similarly, where it's like the cards you're buying from and the people that you're buying from are from a shared pool, and that's a really smart way to do that. Mm-hmm. That's cool.
Anybody have one they want to talk about next?
It's early on. It's one of the first like early games, but for whatever reason, it tickled my fancy, and apparently due to I read a lot of the subreddit. I am in the minority, but I love it. I love Magic Garden.
Oh, I love Magic Garden.
I know, but like, there's a lot of people who are like, yeah, Magic Garden's one of my favorite. And then like, there's a huge string of people in the subreddit and they're like, you're a real one for like a Magic Garden. Like, what a weirdo. Like, this is crazy. That's a crazy one to love. Like, I cannot get enough of that game. I fucking love Magic Garden.
Yeah.
Rips.
I think Magic Garden honestly is one of the best games in the collection. It is, but I'm a big Pac-Man fan, and I also love Snake as well. And this game is essentially a combination of Pac-Man and Snake, right? Like straight up. And essentially the way that it sort of works is you play as this girl, and you're like this magical girl who is trying to collect all these kind of slimes called oppies. And there's this witch, this like rival witch who is sending out like bad enemies or whatever, right? And it's your job to kind of like pick up the good oppies and deposit them in these little star zones, right? And if you deposit enough of them, then you get this potion. And the potion is essentially like a super pellet from Pac-Man, right? And so whenever you pick that up, all the bad oppies that are filling up the board, that if you touch them, you die, all of a sudden you can munch them up, right? And totally take over them, and then then rinse and repeat, right? And then all of a sudden you've got this amazing gameplay loop, and you're kind of trying to get to, I think, 200 saved, and then I think the cherry is getting a certain threshold of high score, right? But it is such an addicting loop. This is one that I keep telling Summer to play, because I know Summer
would love that game.
Summer would love it, like, because I think the theming of it and like the style of it is very Summer. But then also I know Summer's a big Pac-Man fan, and I'm like, you will just eat this up. It's incredible.
Yeah, that's a great, as you mentioned, Brian, like the Venn diagramness of a lot of the games in here, trying to find, okay, what are some classic arcade games and how can we like fuse them together and make something even better? And I feel like part of the franticness of it is like the map is pretty small for this relative to some of those other games. And so I don't know, it makes the map feel so much tighter when there's just all these I don't know the names like David does, but all these blobs everywhere across the screen.
I only do it because I was showing the gameplay on screen. And
there you go.
But yeah, then there's like an aha moment that happens. I don't know like how much y'all have played, but the if you like try to deposit when you're not in the star zone, and then you drop the ones that are following you. Have you done this?
Oh yeah, that's the meta.
That's
of
like
the game.
the meta. Like that's how, like, because then they just become evil, and so you get like you get to the point where you're like, okay, well now I'm gonna grab a potion that I've left on the ground for a long time, and I've like enough things have accumulated. I'm now gonna spin right as I grab this, and then just chomp through all of those guys, and then chomp up this huge board, and you just get this huge amount of points. And god damn, does it feel good? It feels so good.
The cherry, to get the cherry in it, I believe it is. To get the cherry in it, you have to get 20,000 points. I think the high score right now online is like 3 million something. So it's like people have really figured out how to crack it. You know what I mean? Yeah. And people are really going whole hog on it, which I love to see. But Magic Garden is definitely a standout for me as well. We talked like a little bit about Barbuda at the beginning, and that's kind of like the very first game. I guess you could kind of call it a Metroidvania. It reminds me almost something kind of like a Prince of Persia style game almost. But you know, you do have combat and you're going through. It's very simple, but it's also like a game that is best played by like drawing out the map on a piece of paper and shit like that.
Oh, I got it right here.
Oh,
David.
There you go.
This is my Barbuda map. You can see I still have a lot of work to do up top, but I started working on it.
And I'm not showing a bunch of footage from it right now because the demo in the game that I keep going back to, it doesn't have a demo. It just kind of starts, you know, and there's no sound or anything. But
that game doesn't even have music, right?
Yeah,
like, I think it has a couple sound effects, but it's clearly the first game in the
right.
The lore of the game is that the guy made it while working like a finance like job, like whatever like software job he was currently working. He made this game in his spare time.
Right. Well, LX Systems
launched the thing.
When his boss wasn't looking over his shoulder, he just
right. Exactly. Very much.
Which I find it so funny that because that's an Eric Cirque game, like the composer. But it's one of the games that doesn't have music, like even though it's like the one he made. So I like that little angle to it as well.
But yeah, that's the very first game, and so I think a lot of people get turned off from the collection right away. Like I have barely played Barbuda. Like I'm not gonna lie. Like it's very easy. It doesn't just grab you like a lot of the other games do. You really have to put in the work, right? Like you showed with your fucking maps there, Dylan.
Yeah.
But one game that does really grab you, I think, and is very strange and is a spiritual sequel to Barbuda is Mooncat. And Mooncat is also made by Thorsten Petter, right? Or Eric Cirque, as I theorize, right? And Mooncat is known to be kind of the spiritual sequel to it. You play as this sort of like strange alien eggplant with legs, and you are going through. It's weird because it is kind of the most Super Mario Brothers out of any of the games in this. It's kind of the 2D platformer, right, of the group that isn't like a run and gun. It reminds me a lot of Mario, but what kind of it's got a lot of the obtuseness of Barbuda and is got a lot of secrets and is very strange and odd, but it's amplified by the bonkers control scheme. And essentially, if you're playing on a controller, every direction on the D-pad, whichever direction you press, will make you go left. And then any face button that you press will make you go right. So there's really just two buttons, right? And then as you're going right, if you press anything on the D-pad, you'll jump. And then if you are going left, if you press any of the buttons while you're holding that, you'll jump, going in that direction. It's really hard to explain, and it's even harder to learn. Like as you're playing, it doesn't really make a ton of sense, and you have to kind of wrap your head around it.
Controls don't explain this either.
Yeah,
the controls just say this does the things do this and the things do this. Go.
Yeah,
that's fine. That's fun.
Yeah, I think it shows every D-pad and every button, and it just says movement.
Right.
Come on, man.
I love that one because like to beat the game and get the gold doesn't take that long. I think it's like 20-30 minutes. And it just like to remember how bad you are in the first couple minutes of like, what is this game? This is horrible. But then even by the end of like 20-30 minutes to get to the end of it, you have just mastered the controls and you can move so fast. You're doing your jumps into your bum drop, like combo off enemies or your slides. And I don't know, just like it's such a great distillation of like mastering a platformer's controls into just like, how can we make that as short and as tight as possible? And a good way to do it is to make the controls just super wonky. But I think it's so effective at that. And then obviously it's one of those games that is just steeped in mystery and hidden stuff to it. And I know to get the cherry, like there's some things you have to do that, David, you were telling me on Discord, and I have not found any of those hidden things yet. So I feel like I've only scratched like the very top layer of it as well.
I
but
did.
it's
I
very
did look up a
exciting.
little bit of people talking about this game and just how some of the secrets are laid out. And once I learned some of that, I was like, oh. And then I started looking through it, and I think that's something that I like about this. I'm not really looking up like walkthroughs or like videos on how to do things, but I don't beat myself up when I go and try to like look up little hints on like, hey, well, to find a secret in this game, you have to look for this. And if you jump over it this way, then all of a sudden you have a blank and you're like, oh, because that's the kind of shit that you would hear like on the playground or whatever, right? You know, like, like talking with your friends that are also playing through it at the same time. So it's very much, Binding of Isaac and Spelunky are also kind of built on this, where they don't really tell you a bunch of stuff up front. And it's about kind of the community around the game sort of figuring everything out together, and I just really appreciate that about this game.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the way that I've described it to people is like Mooncat is like the first time you picked up a controller. Like you've never, like, you're playing Super Mario for the first time and your brain says, I want to jump, and you don't know how to make the things happen.
Yeah.
Like, as nowadays you play a platformer, you can, like, once you've played enough, you know how to do them. It's like there might be a gimmick or something, but you can mostly do it. But like with Mooncat, it's like you're sitting there, you're like, I want to go right and jump on the guy. I can't do it. Like, my brain hasn't figured it out. You have to like retrain it in your skull, like how to like make the thing happen. And that's such a cool experience to relive.
Yeah.
Like after decades of playing games,
That's a really
to be
great
able
way
to
to put
be
it.
gifted this whole new experience, or like to relive that experience again, is like a fucking gift and also wizardry. Like, how the fuck did they make that be able to a thing that you get to do again?
Yeah.
Like, that's crazy.
It's amazing.
I love it.
I'd like to maybe talk about some of the standout multiplayer games in this as well, because there's a lot of really great ones. As far as like kind of competitive multiplayer games, I think there's like two that I'd really like to talk about. The first one is Bushido Ball. And if you are a fan of Windjammers, then this game will be up your fucking alley. This game is incredible. It is definitely one of the best in the collection, especially for competitive multiplayer. And it is, I mean, it's hard to separate it from its inspiration because it is very inspired by Windjammers, but essentially you play as these two samurai or ninjas or something. You're kind of these ancient Japanese characters. Each one is different and they all have different abilities, and you're basically trying to hit these balls back and forth in order to get into the other person's goal. I'm showing some video of it right now to kind of better explain it, but it's just got this frantic, maniacal energy to it, right? And it's very tennis and pongy, like I feel like Windjammers is just Pong with it's top down Pong with frisbees, and this is very similar to that. And matches can go for a really long time. You can be volleying for a really long time. This is one that is definitely fun to play single player. Like, the actual campaign is a ton of fun, and it gets really hard by the very end.
So fucking hard.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
You get a lot of continues, which is good, but the cherry is beat it without continues, and you're like, how the fuck am I going to do that?
Wow.
But really, this game shines in multiplayer, and I can actually see this one being like a fan favorite going forward at like conventions or whatever. This seems to me like a game developer's game that you would see at like game dev meetups, right? That people would be playing together.
Yeah,
Nice.
no, it's a fucking blast. I really, really enjoyed it. I vented at David quite thoroughly while trying to get gold. It's very hard. I think 29 continues is how many it took me to get through it.
Whoa, okay,
I am not
okay.
proud, but I did not stop and I got it. But it's so fun. It has that like easy to pick up and play, but tough to master quality that I think a lot of like couch competitive games like shine on, like your samurai guns, your tower falls and that kind of thing. It's a totally different game because you're not like killing each other, but like 2 buttons, you're moving around, but every character has a slight different gimmick to it. And like, there's enough depth in like the small variations that create so much like interesting interactions that it's a really cool game. I feel like I've barely scratched the surface on it, and I've played hours of it.
Yeah, totally. Another one I'd like to talk about as well is Hyper Contender. This is another multiplayer game where I could see this actually becoming a really big fun game to play. This one is a platform fighter, so think kind of like Super Smash Brothers, think Towerfall, think Samurai Gun, something like that. So if you enjoy those kinds of games, which I in particular have a friend group which adores these kinds of games, right? So I think Bibon being among them. This I could see being a really big hit at like PAX or something, like seeing like hyper contender tournaments or something like that going forward. But basically the way that this one works is, you know, you're trying to hit each other, you have all these enemies and they all do different abilities, like and the movement even is different on each. It's not like every character has a jump. One of the characters you go up and down by like using an elevator, or one of them like flips gravity, you know, or one of them uses grappling hooks in order to jump, right? But basically you're trying to hit each other in any way you can, and then there's kind of a ring mechanic, sort of like Sonic the Hedgehog. So, you know, like as you hit somebody, they'll pop a ring out, right? And then you can go collect that ring, right? You know, and also rings are spawning throughout it, right? So basically the match is over when you collect 5 rings between the two people. And so it's got this really frantic energy to it. And again, it's like the matches can be over in 30 seconds, or they can go on for like 5-10 minutes if you guys are both really fucking fighting for it. In that way, it really reminds me of something like Nidhogg. Have you guys played Nidhogg before?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know, and that's, you know, I've played matches of Nidhogg that have gone on for like a half hour before, you know? So yeah,
it's exhausting.
Really but Hyper Contender is definitely one. If you like competitive games, this one's right up your alley.
Yeah, totally agree. It reminds me also a lot of the Spelunky deathmatch mode, which is something that's like a very understated part of that game. But to have like a version of that feels like a little bit more balanced, because in deathmatch and Spelunky, it's like you get hit with a bomb, you get stunned, and you're just done for.
Dead.
But this feels balanced. But then also, since the characters are so crazy different from each other, everyone feels like kind of OP in their own way. Like they all have access to different tricks, and you know, some of them are going to be weaker or stronger against others, of course. But from what I've played so far, and I haven't played against a human, just against the bots, who are pretty. Side note, I feel like the bots are insanely powerful across the board in this. Of course, in like a platform where I have like dumb AI or something, but anything like you mentioned in Bushido Ball, but like Disconia too, if you've played that one, the AI does the craziest like trigonometry on every hit. They get the craziest hits. So I feel like that's a general thing with the multiplayer games. And Hyper Contender, they can definitely, like some of the certain, they get a certain type, I don't know the name of the characters, I cannot beat them at all, because they're just so strong with those certain movesets.
Yeah, you briefly just name dropped Lords of Disconia. It's definitely worth talking about. A very odd game, but a very cool one. It's kind of cool. It's like kind of a strategy game a little bit. It's like turn-based in a way, but then it also has a lot of elements of carom. If you've ever played carom before, it's kind of it's an Indian game originally. I only know it because I've played Clubhouse Games 51 Worldwide Classics, in which carom is a game, but it's kind of like billiards or something like that, but with like little discs, and you're shooting them out at each other. A little bit. Yeah, shuffleboard, or maybe even, dare I say it, Beyblade, or similar games as well. But that's kind of a strategy game where each one kind of has its own powers, and you shoot across the board in order to hit them, and kind of, you know, bank shots off the walls and stuff like that in order to hit people. And very, very fun game.
Yeah, that game, and just the thing in general is, we haven't really mentioned this a whole lot, but the art in this game is fantastic. Like the pixel art looks amazing. I think one of the coolest things that is a great idea for this was that the whole collection has like a unified color palette. I believe it's 32 colors. And I was reading an interview with some of the team on this when they were talking about like the construction of that palette, because obviously they've been working on these games for years, and you want to ideally nail that down as soon as possible. That way you don't have to go back and redraw all these sprites. But they talked about how, you know, they start with like a lot of greens and blues, like for the ground and the sky and water and basic things like that. But then after they got the basics down, like adding in some of the funkier colors, like this very specific yellow that they're fond of, or to me, my favorite is just like the UFO 50 pink. This game is definitely described by like that, you know, especially the Steam like banner art is all like that UFO pink that is like the pilot pink as well, which I just love the aesthetic of this game. It looks so good, and I think it's such a smart idea to have all the games unified to like 32 pixel. Like that's quite a few colors to choose from. Like the games still have a very distinct style.
So much so where I'm like, is that
cohesive
accurate?
At the same time?
There's an awesome documentary I watched a long time ago, and I forget exactly what it's called, but it's basically about how filmmakers, when they give themselves when they give themselves like restrictions, they find that that's when sort of creativity can flourish at its best. When you give yourself like, oh, I can only do this and this and this, all of a sudden you've gone from a billion infinite possibilities of what you could do down to like 100,000, but that's way better than what you had before. And all of a sudden you can latch on to an idea easier. I feel like that's something that they definitely took into account when kind of building this game out in the first place. Right.
Totally. And also I think it's a really good launching off point for about like how they, like they put these constraints, and these are all taking place in the 80s or whatever, where they're like in NES time. And they do a really good job of taking those constraints of the time period, but also letting some of those constraints go.
Mm-hmm.
Like they didn't try to, like they specifically at one point, like played with the idea of having sprite stuttering, like where they can't render as many things. Because if you play like an old NES game, like if you have a side scroller or like a shooter game, there's a lot of like sprites popping in and out, that happen because it can't have that. It can't render that many things in. And they were just like, no, that doesn't add to a positive experience. Yes, that's correct, but like that doesn't feel good as a player nowadays. We can let that go. And so they do a really good job of like choosing the specific constraints that add to their creativity without holding on to everything and making it painful as a player.
Totally.
And it's really cool.
It's funny. You say that they don't do sprite stuttering, but I think Warp Tank does do that.
I think it does a little bit.
It does a little bit.
I think Pilot Quest too, like if an enemy's like right on the edge of the screen, they'll sometimes kind of be almost glitching in and out. And
just a little bit. But it's like, but it's rare when it does it. And when it does do it, it's almost like a little jarring,
Right.
But I do want to mention Warp Tank is a really awesome game. That's a sort of a puzzle action game, something like that. Brian, do you want to take this one?
I fucking love Warp Tank. That was one of the games that I booted up and I was just immediately like, this is one of my favorite games. I fucking love it. It's so you're a little tank that can move like you start out moving left and right, but you can warp to the opposite plane that you're on. So if you're on the ground, you can warp to the ceiling. If you're on the left wall, you can warp to the right wall. Mm-hmm. And so you warp directly across from where your like little turret is facing. And so when you can move left and right and you can shoot from your turret, and there's like, 45-degree walls so that you can move between the flat and the walls themselves. Mm-hmm. And so the whole game, a lot of it revolves around trying to figure out how to move through this space. And so you're like warping to the ceiling so you can move to this space, so you can move to this little part to warp to like move up on the side of the wall to warp over here.
Sure.
So like it might look like a very simple staircase that you could normally move up, but like every interaction to move through requires you to think through how you can like use the terrain to warp around. Mm-hmm. And it just like absolutely scratched a part of my brain that I was like,
yeah.
Well, especially like how like the teleport is so fast and snappy that the game just feels so good. Like, and I love the structure of it too, that there's kind of an overworld to it. And as you're beating these levels, which are shaped like pills, you're like unlocking different areas. So you're kind of doing like a bit of Metroidvania in between the levels. And then each level is kind of built around a central mechanic. I especially love the ones that are just like combat arenas. Mm-hmm. Those ones I find really challenging, but really engaging, with boss fights in there too. But yeah, this game is it's just perfect. It's just a perfect game. And it's another one that I would easily buy on its own. I've
one of the biggest ones too. I feel like it's a really long game.
Yeah. After you get the gold, it's like, here's like a ton more levels to go find. Good luck. And a lot of them are just like
gold, and it said it's like 66% of the game.
Jesus Christ.
And I wouldn't even know where to go next. Like it's pretty well hidden. I've only found one coffee in Warp Tank. Have you guys found many, if any, coffees?
Well, I've done a couple
technically
of them,
one because of the end. It gave me one for finishing. But then I was just like, what?
I think that's the cherry for this game too, is like finding the coffee in every level. But man, like a couple of the earlier levels I went back to try and scrounge and find those coffees, and I swear I went every single corner. I could not find them. So
yeah,
I don't know. It seems pretty difficult to do, but a good just long-term goal on that one.
Coffees are like the kind of collectibles that you occur throughout the series.
Mhm.
There's a lot of, like I talked about earlier, like repeating themes. Coffees I think started in Ninpec. There are coffee pickups that you can get in that game, and then they continued in Campanella, and you see them in Warp Tank. And then also I think like the kind of gravity switching mechanic that you see in this, you see in a bunch of games as well. I think that Warp Tank is probably the one that started it, but then you also then see it also in Vanger, which is for my money, kind of the spiritual successor to Warp Tank, but if you're looking for a straight up Metroidvania, this is your straight up Metroidvania. Like, this is a Metroid game, essentially, right?
But even down
it's-
to the theming of it, it feels like you're playing as Samus Jr. or something.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you can run and shoot, just like in Metroid, but it's got the kind of VVV kind of gravity flip mechanic that you also saw in Warp Tank, and then like I said,
Hyper Contender,
and you also see it in Hyper Contender, right? So again, it's just kind of like these themes kind of start popping up throughout this entire collection, and that's so satisfying to kind of like see this stuff kind of shake out, right, and show itself. But yeah, I mean, Vanger is an incredible game. It is very, very good. I think it's got one issue, and that's that you can't pull up the map whenever you want.
Ooh.
You can only see maps at save points because the LX controller does not have a start button. There are literally it's just a D-pad and an A and B button, and that's it, right? So the start button in this game kind of pulls you to the UFO 50 overall menu, right? The system menu and not individual menus. So I don't know that was necessarily the best design decision. Some games definitely have a little bit of issues because of it.
Pseudo Regalia is the only Metroidvania I'll give a break to for not having a map. Other than that, like, I want a map at all times, and I want it to be very detailed.
And even then, I think he eventually caved to pressure and did put a map into that game, or at least was talking about it for a while. Yeah. People were not happy about that, but Vanger is an incredible game. Like I said, it is very much a standard Metroidvania that could be sold on its own. Just an amazing thing. Anybody else?
Can I talk a little bit about Mortal right now? Because Mortal was, I think, it was the first one that I just truly fell in love with in the collection, and then that's happened like 20 other times. But first of all, just a very grim setting for this game, and a very weird, like, as soon as you get into it, okay, simple 2D platformer. But the first thing I noticed was like, I have 20 lives. What an odd thing for a platformer to give me 20 lives. This game must be super hard. But then you find out that the core mechanic of it is that it's kind of like a Lemmings or like a Pikmin situation where you're using you have 20 people, not 20 lives for one guy, and you're using each other's bodies as like platforms, so you can turn into a rock and jump on that, or you can turn yourself into a dart, fly into a wall and make a little platform, or explode your character, self-destruct, and take out a bunch of blocks at the same time. And I think it really took me a while to figure out all the mechanics in there, but like the general idea being that there's like 8 levels in the game, and as you're going through, let's say I started that first level 20 guys. I'm going through the level, I'm losing guys, but then I'm gaining guys. By the end of it, let's say I had like 12 people left. Now for level 2, I only have 12 people. And so now it's like, oh shit, there's like this meta game element to it that feels very similar to like Sifu, the way Sifu has this mechanic of like you're aging up whenever you lose lives, and you can kind of replay older levels to perfect the gameplay. So I don't know if Sifu is a influence for this one, but I think it'd be cool if it was. But yeah, just like optimizing different levels, replaying them over and over, finding hidden pathways, finding ways to just optimize my movement, or just like planning the route and then just trying to execute perfectly. And to get that cherry, oh my God, you need so many lives. So I still have to perfect a lot of it, but goddamn, I love Mortal. And then it's one of the few games that has like a direct sequel in here, which is like, hey, let's take that same idea, but give you 100 lives and a huge like open world map. And so rather than being split into different levels, you just have 100 guys to like complete everything. And that one's been really fun to route plan as well. You have different characters with crazy movesets. One guy that just makes a tube in the ground. Like I love both those Mortal games. Like the theming of them and the gameplay, just so smart and so simple at the same time. They're just brilliant.
Yeah. And that's another great example of, a game coming out early in UFO Soft's career and then them kind of making a sequel some years later. And it really feels like Mortal 2 is like, it's like, okay, yeah, we took Mortal 1. Now let's put a whole different spin on it, right? Like Mortal 1, like it's like level, and you just play the levels as you go. Mortal 2 is like a big area, right? And it's like, and you start with 100 guys, and they all have different classes and abilities, and I love it. Just feels like this very natural progression of these games throughout, like over the years, right? It's just so cool that they put all that thought into it.
It's also a good example of a lot of these games. I would say every game, even if it looks cute, it's fucked up. Like all of these games have like twisted shit happening in them.
That's such a great
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, now I'm trying to think of like what's the most wholesome game in the bunch here, and I don't even know what it would be off the top of my head.
I mean, I was gonna say Waldorf's Journey, but even that's fucked up. Like,
No, it's super fucked.
have you guys played Waldorf's Journey?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was just playing more of it today after we played some co-op.
Yeah, Waldorf's
Yeah,
Journey is a game where you're playing as this walrus, and it's like kind of psychedelic, and you're flinging yourself. It kind of reminds me of like Angry Birds or something like that, where you
Yeah, a
know
little bit,
you
eh?
kind of
Yeah.
like are aiming yourself, and then you give yourself momentum and toss yourself, and you're just trying to get to the end of the stage. Right? It's not a very long game at all. In fact, it's quite quick, but it's so fun, and it's colorful, and I think it's got some of the best graphics in the entire collection, honestly. And you're just this big chunky boy, and you have a little bit, you can flap your wings a little bit and have a little bit of ability to land on platforms. But if you die, and that's the end, right? But you know, as you're playing it, you're like, oh, there are these like signs throughout that have these really kind of disturbing messages as you're reading it. And then as you're going through, I kind of don't even want to spoil like what the big caveat is at the end of this game, but it's quite dark, you know, and the when you beat the game, there's kind of a final cinematic, and you're like, oh my God, like that's what
we're doing?
this was all for. And you know, and it's like, it's
Yeah.
really,
Whoa, I don't know what's going on here, but I like this tease. I'm
Yeah.
excited to get back in there and finish this thing.
It's a really cool game. And it's also got an awesome 2-player versus multiplayer battle,
Oh, cool.
which is very different from how the single player works, but is complete chaos and is so much fun. I would definitely recommend you play through the single player first before playing the co-op with somebody else. And that's easy to do because the game is so short. But yeah.
Have you guys experienced any co-op games that are more like cooperative rather than competitive, working together to complete a goal?
Ninpak is co-op.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ninpak is
Mortal is co-op.
Oh, that would be. Are you like swapping back and forth for Mortal?
Yeah, you play every other life.
That's
cool. I like that a lot.
So like if you accidentally you're talking about, okay, well, you're gonna do this, I'm gonna do this, and then I mess up, and now you've got to do the thing that we've got to like flip like
Nice.
what our roles are.
Cool.
And so yeah, it's pretty neat.
One that we were playing earlier today, Dylan, was Kick Club. And that's kind of the what is it? The Bubble
Bobble.
Thank you, Bubble Bobble kind of style game. Yeah, excuse me. Whoops, I just outed myself as North American. But yeah, it's kind of a Bubble Bobble style game where you're kicking a soccer ball into other sports enemies. So it's like, you know, you'll be fighting against like a bunch of tennis balls or
sneaker.
sneakers in the track and field section, right? But that's a pretty great co-op. I do wish that the co-op was a little bit more like integrated. Like that's something that we were running into today. It's like if you die, you're just dead, and now I'm playing by myself, and that's kind of just how it goes, right?
You know what's funny about that? After we played, because as soon as we finished playing, I booted that game up single player because I hadn't even dusted it off yet. But I was like, I want to play more Kick Club, and I read the description of it, and it says a versus mode was started but not finished before the game's release. Right. So it almost like is contextualizing this like half-assed multiplayer effort for it. Like it's still playable and it's still fun, but like that's a weird detail to throw in there when like it felt totally playable and finished to me, even if it wasn't like my favorite co-op experience.
My headcanon is that it then became Bushido Ball.
Interesting.
Totally. I could see that because Bushido Ball, you know, came out the following year, right? Like Kick Club came out in 1984 and Bushido Ball came out in 1985.
Okay.
So yeah, that totally.
The kind of fully realized version of that.
Yeah. They took this like kind of kicking a ball around thing, and they're like, oh, let's like really drill into a multiplayer.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting thing. Like even we were just talking about Mortal, and I'm pretty sure once again, the credits in the actual game is very confusing. So it's like, it's hard to know which developer Derek Q. Erickson made which game. But I do feel like that's generally a theme across the board, is like someone has an idea like Mortal, and then a different developer on the project is going to make the sequel. So they're like, okay, that's a cool idea that you had there with that one. How can I riff on it? And I feel like that happens for a lot of the games here. Like all the Campanellas, I'm pretty sure, are made by someone else, someone different. You know, I'm sure they're all play testing, providing feedback on each other's games. But I really like that element of it where you're seen some similar genres, but like they always feel fresh and different.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk briefly about ping golf. There are two golf games in this. One of them we talked about earlier, and I showed some footage of Golfaria, which is kind of a top-down, almost Legend of Zelda style game where you play as a golf ball, right? And then there's another golf game in here called Pin Golf, which is a side-scrolling 2D golf game that is also kind of a pinball game, right? And so as you're playing, you're sort of, you've got 18 holes, just like a standard golf game. Kind of wish there were 2 sets of 18, but that's fine. And and you've got this really cool kind of like dunk mechanic, right? So as you're shooting the ball and sending it forward, you can drop the ball at any point and it'll kind of bounce and then hit off of all these pins or off of bumpers or whatever. And you've got a like whole cast of interesting characters that you can play as. So that's really cool. As someone, on Super Switch Headz, we've done a whole episode on golf video games, and I just love that there are 2 whole golf games within this collection, and they're very different, and neither of them are standard golf games in any form or fashion. I just find that really funny.
They're bizarro golf games.
Yeah.
Golfaria is insane. Like, it definitely continues to, like, as you kind of peel away the onion of that game, it just like keeps doubling and tripling down on the ideas that it sort of sets off on its like initial promise. And Ping Golf is very similar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've had a lot of fun with those ones there. Yeah, Golfaria has been a tricky one for me too. It's just awkward to be moving around in an RPG like game like that with this very kind of stuttered movement. But it's Pin Golf is just so good.
I'd like to bring up another great one, which is Night Manor.
So good.
Night Manor is a really incredible game. I imagine you haven't played this one yet, Brian.
I haven't made it that far now.
Yeah. But this one is really fantastic. It is a point and click adventure game. It's also a horror game. Very similar to Clock Tower. I think it's very Clock Tower coded.
Cool.
Clock Tower coded. And it's a really, really special game. I think this is one that I put off playing for a while just because I knew I really wanted to sink my teeth into it. I played it on stream and I think I'm only about 33% of the way through right now. There's a lot more I need to do. I just got to the upstairs of the manor.
Okay.
So there is a little bit there, but as I kind of said, it is a point and click adventure game, and you go around and you can interact with items or you can pick them up. But then there's also a sinister sort of killer on the loose, right? So as you're going through, it almost has kind of this vibe of, and I was hoping that there would be a demo for this game, but it's just hanging on the title screen. So I'll move that back. As you're going through, it reminds me a lot of Alien Isolation in a way, right? So it's there's that, or something like what was that one game? There was a whole bunch of them. It's kind of the early days of Amnesia. That's right, yeah. Where you kind of have to like, you'll have to like go into different rooms and not have them hit you. And then when the guy shows up as well, your cursor, which is moving around to like click stuff, starts shaking because you're scared, right? And so like as your hand is shaking, you can go and like grab a knife that's in your inventory and try to stab him, but it gets a lot harder, like as like he's right in your face. So that's just a really great kind of spin on that. I think something that I like about this collection in general is a lot of the games of genres that I find to be really boring, like kind of like tactics games or turn-based games, or even something like a wizardry game. Like one of them in here that I really love is called Valbrace. And, like first-person dungeon crawling games, I have always wanted to get into that genre, but I found the kind of turn-based like fighting mechanics to be rather dull, and I just didn't really get into. But Valbrace takes that first-person dungeon crawling game and kind of makes it active, right? Like as you're fighting, you are like dodging and you're slashing and you're moving, and it's all in this first-person view. And I think another one that's great in that way is it a Tactics? One of the early games that kind of feels like a turn-based strategy game, but all the turns are like 1 second long, and it's like you have to like kind of like very quickly move your units around. It kind of feels like if you were playing Advance Wars in like 5 times speed or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And both turns are happening simultaneously and revealed at the same time. Like both teams are like, and we move. And we move.
Yeah.
And we move.
Yeah, I gotta pull up some of the tactics here. But yeah, that's a very special game as well.
Yeah, jumping back a little bit, I loved Night Manor. That was one I played through, I think in just one sitting. I think it took me 3 hours. There's different endings, and I got a couple different endings. I won't spoil the stuff that happens later on, but like another one, once again, just the art is so beautiful in that game, just kind of really fleshing out this house. And yeah, like point and click adventure game. I haven't played that genre in like 20 years, since like Putt Putt and like Pajama Sam when I was like a kid. So
Hell
it's
yeah.
fun to go back to like a gameplay like that. But like I'm really into horror games these days. So
Sure.
that was like the first game I played to kick off like the Halloween season here. And yeah, so I had a great time playing through that one. I just couldn't put it down. I had to see the start to finish like in one go pretty much.
Well, we've been going a little bit longer than I thought even we would when we were starting here, but I'm having a really good time talking through some of this with you guys. Are there any other ones that you guys definitely want to give a shout out to as we're going through this?
Quick shout out to Velgris. That game rips. It's pretty early on in the collection. It's like number 7. It's like reverse Downwell. Also made by
It's Upwell.
Downwell.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Upwell. You're trying to climb out of effectively a hell planet. And every time you die, you start back over. And it has like a very light roguelite thing. It's not really all that complicated, but in between each level, you can buy some stuff. And it's so tight and fast. And when you die, it's over so quickly. You make one dumb platforms above your head and you hit it and you fall down and you start the whole thing over again. But the loop is so good. And like, I don't know. I love that game.
Yeah. For a while there, like anytime I booted up UFO 50, it's fun because it's like, oh, I'm gonna have multiple courses to this meal. I'm gonna have like an appetizer. I'm gonna get into the main course, maybe dessert later. And it's always like Ninpek and Velgris are like the two that I always start with.
Yeah.
I'm like, I just want to get my fingers a little warm here. I want to move around with a fun little platformer. And I feel like just across the board, like there's 2D platformers are a pretty common thing in here. Of course, all of them are different. And like Barbuda and Mooncat intentionally feel pretty bad. Eventually Mooncat you'll start to figure it out. But I feel like Velgris to me is like the peak in terms of just like 2D platformer movement just feels so crisp. The double jump, the way if you like snipe right through like a 1-block hole, and just like the fact that all the blocks are crumbling under your feet constantly just adds this intensity to it. Like that one was, I finally got the cherry on it now, so it's no longer my warm-up game, but I still just want to go back and play it, even though I've got everything.
I cherried that game on my first
it.
Go. Actually, it was like, or not,
what?
Not my first time playing it, but rather
the first. Say you're a god gamer.
No. It took me a while. I did beat the game. It is one of my favorites. It was kind of my first love in this pack, but the first time I beat it, I didn't even know what the cherry was because I got it I got the gold. But yeah, there's also there's a sequel to Velgris as well in this collection, which is called Overbold. And Overbold is not similar in the same kind of gameplay style, but it is like a story sequel to Velgris, and you play as the same character, right? And it's kind of a Smash TV style top-down shooter. It does remind me a lot of like Binding of Isaac, where you're kind of shooting in different. You're walking around and shooting in different directions as you're moving and avoiding enemy fire and stuff like that. And it's got this wonderful mechanic where it's basically like, enemies will spawn and you'll have to destroy them. And then after each round, you have the ability to kind of like in Velgris buy upgrades. But then you also can increase the number of enemies that you'll be fighting in the next round in order to get
so good, man.
More
Such a great
payout.
Loop.
Right. And so then with the more payout that you get, you can then buy better upgrades. And then, it's like 8 levels in and there's like a giant boss fight at the end. Right. And with like tons of enemies all over the screen. So you really want to push it early on so you can buy all the best upgrades that you can as you go. So that one's really special as well.
Yeah. I feel like it almost tricked me a little bit because the first time I picked it up and played it, I didn't even realize I could like add enemies into the wave. So I was just fighting, 3 or 4 enemies each round, and it was really easy. And then I made it to the final boss, and it's the final boss, and then there's like 100 enemies, and I have no upgrades because I haven't made any money because I wasn't taking any risks. And so I just got destroyed. And then I was like, oh, I see what this game is doing now. But it's so snappy. That has been my obsession now. Even like right before we started recording, I was just ripping up Overbold until we were ready to get going. I haven't beat it yet, but it's so satisfying. It's so good. And yeah, question for you guys, because a lot of the descriptions, like if when you're looking through the collection on the far right tab, there's like a kind of a lore fun description. And I'm trying to figure out like the context of how all those are written, because the one for Overbold is like, this is the second of 3 games to star alpha, but I don't think unless I'm wrong, that she actually has a third game. So I don't know if the idea is that like they were planning to make a third one and they got canceled, or like the system went down, they went bankrupt kind of thing. But like I kind of feel like I was reading the descriptions as if like the recovery team was writing these today, you know, as they're putting this compilation together. So I don't know, like where do you guys think the descriptions contextually come from?
That's a good question, because it does sound like they're written in the first person as if they were the developers, right? So maybe
like those are not things that would be part of the original game. Those are only existing because of the UFO, like the collection.
I think it might be notes that they found. And again, I don't want to get too into it, but throughout this game, there is a terminal, right? And I think that it is worth bringing this up because there is sort of this terminal here where you can like type in different codes and whatnot, kind of like you would on like a regular computer, right? And so, and I don't want to give anything away on how you do it, but there's certainly a way that you can kind of start getting into how some of the terminal works. And I think that throughout this, a lot of the game secrets are kind of built around this in-game terminal. And not only can you use the terminal on like the main menu, you can also use the terminal within games. So the games will sometimes give you like little 8-character codes and you can type those into the terminal, and often those will be like cheat codes for the game, right? Like it'll be like, oh, now I can play Velgress with like all the abilities unlocked, right? I think when you roll credits, you kind of get a code that gives you like the best build or whatever, right? For Velgress. But there are also ones that it's like, are purposefully made for this collection, right? So I think that there are ones, I think like the creators of this collection of 50 emulator essentially that's playing these emulated ROMs, right? Kind of went in and changed a couple little things and added little secrets that then it kind of makes this overarching story and narrative. And I think some of that stuff that you're asking questions about, you kind of learn through different avenues when you kind of start following the rabbit hole and going down the different kind of pathways. And there's definitely a couple things I found that were truly shocking and really opened the game up in some really unique ways. But yeah, I think just a simple collection of 50 games, this is not. There is a much bigger story and kind of a bigger secret to it overall.
One would say almost a full ARG built into this game.
Right.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Is it weird that I've been like scared of the terminal? Like
No.
I just find it a bit, there's something spooky about it. And like, I don't want to like break the game by like putting in a code. Like, I don't know, if you do something like that with her Velgress, is that an example like of an actual thing? Or are you just saying like, that's what it,
that is something that happens.
Yeah. Like it doesn't do that permanent, right? Like when you reset the game. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm scared I'm going to like change something permanently. And like, because of how mysterious it is, I'm like, I don't want to touch this yet until I've beaten all these games.
Is hidden behind like an admin privilege.
Oh, okay. That's
true.
That's smart.
It does say that. Yeah. They really, everything just like has a in-game diegetic reason for it to be, right? Like
that's so cool.
I think it's so great. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe we could start wrapping it up. I mean, there's like so much more we could fucking talk about because there's just like so many great games in this collection. Man, you know, there's a lot of great puzzle games in here too. You know, like I think that's a genre we haven't really touched on yet, but like Camouflage and Block Koala and even like Rail Heist. You know, like Rail Heist is a really cool kind of like stealth.
It's like an immersive sim turned 2D simple platform. Like it's so cool that they took that genre and distilled it down to like the simplest form.
I'm not gonna lie, like I haven't quite really fully cracked into Rail Heist yet. You know, like it's a little like I
feel like it's got a huge skill ceiling to it. That I'm still trying to find.
Exactly, yeah. But that's that's a game that is very much like kind of wrinkles your brain a little bit and has a lot of really cool stuff going on. Like I was talking about before, I think one that I really enjoy quite a bit is Camouflage. That's a game where you play as a chameleon and you're trying to get 2 pickups and your little chameleon friend, and you're trying to get them to the exit without getting gobbled up by a frog or by any other number of hungry beasts, but these are games that are, like we've been talking about a lot of like platformers and Twitch games and precision stuff, right? But there's also a lot of games where you really can take your time. And I think that there really is something for everyone in this collection, like I think there, and that's something that you hear a lot, people like use that expression a lot, but this truly is like, I think that any kind of gamer, like if you like any style of video game, you will find $25 worth of entertainment within this package. Even if most of the games maybe aren't for you, you'll find something in here that really tickles your fancy, I think.
100%. Yeah, and that's the thing that I just like keep on trying to like thrust upon my friends that are like, I don't know if I want to spend $25 on this. It's like, this is the best fucking deal you're gonna have like ever. Like, on sale or not, like just pull the trigger. You're gonna dump enough time into it.
Yeah. I mean, like between the three of us, we have like 100 hours, and I feel like we've all learned a bunch of things from each other just in this discussion because of like the non-linear nature of it. Like you could play it chronologically, like you are, Brian, or you could just play whatever order you want, whatever game looks appealing to you on that day. So
totally,
there's so much to it.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, there's a whole JRPG in this game. Like there is a game called Grimstone, which is like the
same world as Rail Heist 2. It's like more connectivity there.
Totally, and it's
the Western games.
Yeah, it's like a Wild West game, and in fact, I'm going to say this, cover your ears if you really don't want to hear this, but something that I saw on the subreddit is the whole world map for Grimstone is literally the state of Texas. Like it is shaped like the state of Texas. So the game just takes place. It's a JRPG where the world is Texas. And that is just so fucking
relevant
funny
to the Switch Headz podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's got like Super Mario RPG style timing mechanics and all this different kind of stuff, right? So all of these games have like such depth and thought and love put into it. It kind of is like, it's overwhelming just the amount of work and time and effort that must have gone into this game. And I feel like I'll be discovering things about this game for so long in the future.
Yeah. The quality, or the thing that I think it's worth repeating that you mentioned kind of in passing is like that vibe of being on the playground and talking to your friends about things. This game is able to evoke that, just kind of like, we're all experiencing this in all of our own different ways, and we can kind of like cross-pollinate how we all are interacting with this. And even though we might not be sharing like, oh, I learned something new, like I interacted with these things in A, B, and C, and you did it in C, B, and A, and we kind of got a different vibe from doing that. We all have like our own way that we got to the end, and that's just so cool. It's just such a cool like interest. The fact that there are 50 games that we all get to play with in any order makes this, like, even though it's a linear thing, non-linear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Totally.
Yeah, I guess a couple just last very quick shout outs for me. Paint Chase, what if Splatoon was on the NES? That's what you get there, so that's great. Seaside Drive, just the best vibes, really cool shmup, really interesting setting there where you're like drifting a car back and forth. It's totally different than any other shmup I've played.
Yeah.
And is it called Min and Max or Mini and Max? I think it is.
Yeah.
Which is just a game, another one that blows your mind in terms of the scale of it. I don't want to spoil it here for Bebon, but yeah, there's so much to it that I can't even wrap my brain around it. It's huge. And that's, once again, I still haven't even dusted off all these games. So it's just so cool.
I think out of all of them, and I've barely dipped my toe into Mini and Max because I really want to fully give myself to that game, because I've heard a lot of people on like the subreddit be like, Mini and Max is not only the best game in this collection, it's one of the best games I've ever played. And I think that's like obviously a really intense thing to say, but it feels like out of all of the games, that is by far the most fully featured, and like is like the most like, this would have been like a masterpiece on the NES, you know what I mean, to release. And then Seaside Drive, like you said, it's so good. It's so good. It reminds me a lot of what's that one game? Luftrausers. You ever play Luftrausers?
Oh, Luftrausers rules.
Yeah. If you liked Luftrausers, it's that, but you're in a car instead of a plane. And oh boy, Sunset Drive or Seaside Drive is absolutely incredible. Oh man, I do just want to continue talking. There's like full ass games we haven't even brought up, but I think we have to end it at some point. Are there any final ones you want to bring up, Brian, before we call it?
I will just say, Porgy took me a while to get into. I liked it. It's cool. I think it's a neat game. I think it really opens up as you put time into it, and it's got its cool little charms.
Yeah,
it's a cool one.
Porgy is one that I want to love, but I keep getting frustrated by, and I will come back to it. I know there's a lot like you said. I think Dylan earlier. It's like, it'll be there for you later. You know what I mean? It's like,
Totally.
I'm the kind of gamer that I play like little bits of games here and there, and then I bounce off. And then I used to beat myself up for that, but now I'm just like, you know what? That's okay. The game will be there for me later. And it's not hard. It's not like, oh, it's in my backlog and maybe I'll remember that it's on my Switch or on my Steam Deck or in my library somewhere. Like, nope, it's there when I open up the game. Just stare me in the face whenever I'm ready to play it, right? Porgy might have the best graphics. I think I said that earlier about another game, but this game has incredible graphics and music. Absolutely. All right, fuck. I think we got to call it. I think I'm gonna stop it there, guys. But hopefully,
I'm good. I feel like I've said what I need to say.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can talk about everything.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we could do a follow-up episode on this at some point if we wanted to. But I do really think that out of all the games I've played this year, I think UFO 50 is like by far my favorite. I think just because of the variety, but then the overall package and the amount of like thought that has gone into everything, it's going to be really, really hard for me to have a game topple this one for me for my game of the year this year. It's funny because the same week that this game came out, another game that is also in the game of the year contention for me also came out, which was Lawrence Lore. I loved that game as well. I played all the way through that game and I was like, this is my game of the year. And then UFO 50 came out and I'm like, I'm so sorry, Lawrence Lore. I spoke too soon. But it's just a really incredible package. And, you know, hopefully if you've listened to this and you have played the game, this has been a fun kind of, you know, like I find myself listening to YouTube videos of people just talking about these games because I think it's just fun to hear what other people think about this. So if you've played this game, hopefully this has been enjoyable for you in that way. And if you haven't played this game and you're still listening, first of all, hell yeah. What's up, brother? Thanks for joining us. And secondly, hopefully we've kind of proven to you why this game is such an incredible package and you should definitely check it out for yourself. And like we said as well, this thing is made for Switch. You know, it's not on the Switch right now, but it hopefully will be at some point.
It fucking needs to be.
You know, the LX system itself is not a real thing that actually exists, but there are renders of it. And in fact, I posted in our Discord chat earlier, somebody's actually 3D printed one and has made one. And my theory why this game isn't on Switch yet is that they're holding it for the Switch 2. And they're going to make a plastic case that you can slide your Switch 2 into, and that will be the screen of the LX system. That's basically like a dock that you can sit on it.
Don't give me hope. What is this?
One purchase for me.
Exactly, right? Like I want that more than anything, dude. Like that and like a coffee table book of all the box art and manuals. Like that's something else I would also pay an enormous amount of money for.
Oodles of money.
Exactly, right? So hopefully
it happens. Hopefully.
Yeah. And hopefully this game kind of gets a bigger audience, I think, going forward, and more people check it out. It's funny that I feel like a cheerleader for this game. Like, you know, like when Andor came out, like nobody was watching Andor. I was like, you have to watch Andor. You know, I'm like, I feel like I'm doing that all over again for UFO 50, right? So if we've moved the needle for you at all on this game and you're interested in it now, please let us know in the comments, or let us know in our Discord. We'll have links to all of those in the description of this episode. And I just want to thank you guys all for tuning in and listening. If you want to find me online, I am at Monolith Fiji. What about y'all? Where can we find you guys online?
Not much on the social media, so I'll do two quick shoutouts. I also have a podcast called Geekverse Side Quest where I've talked about UFO 50 on like at least 3 separate episodes at this point. So if you want more, go check that out. And then I also released a game earlier this year called Potion Problem. It is on Steam. It is a potion making simulator sort of game. So go check that out.
Very good. And what about you, Brian?
You can find me on Twitter. I will never call it its new name, on BD Bonnet. I've been kind of drifting away from it. I've been trying to get more on Blue Sky. I'm B-Bon on Blue Sky. You can see me on there as well. Those are the two places that I'm at. Very
good. Maybe one day I'll actually make a post on Blue Sky. If you'd like to find our show on social media, we are at Switch Headz on Twitter, at Super Switch Headz on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. We got a Discord, a Facebook group. And we also have a Patreon. So check us out on all of those. We'll have links to all those in the description of this episode. And like I said before, leave a comment, like and subscribe on YouTube. Leave us a review on Apple and all that fun stuff. We'd love to have you over there. And we'll be back next week, probably, with another episode of Super Switch Headz. Who knows? I might still be on vacation in Japan. We're trying to bank a few specials before I go out there so I don't have to edit while I'm on my vacation. But yeah, make sure you tune in the future. We're going to have lots more great episodes for you. But until then, you guys know the drill. Stay safe out there. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to one another. Play UFO 50. That's the takeaway from this episode. We love you very much. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.